Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mitch. Good Saturday evening to you all. Hope you guys are doing awesome out there tonight and had yourselves a wonderful day. And I do hope everyone's been having a great weekend out there so far and staying cool, more importantly. It's been very hot over the last few days. It's hot right now, at least in my neck of the woods. We had 100 degrees a day, still in the upper 90s right now. And it's going to continue to be hot over the next several days. But there is good news for people who are sick of the heat, just like I am. There's a cool down on the way for a large section of the country. So that's all we're going to speak on for tonight's video. I'm excited to talk about this just because I'm ready for some cool air myself. So I thought I would jump on here and make a nighttime video and discuss this with you guys. So that's what we're going to do. Not going to talk about the tropics or heat or anything like that. Just going to specifically speak on this cool down. If you guys have not subscribed, certainly consider doing that. Like the video if you like it. And if anybody has anything that I can pray about or pray over, please put it in the comments below so I can do that. And it gives many others an opportunity to do so too. So let's get going tonight. So if you live in these blue areas, this is where the Climate Prediction Center is calling for the chance for below average temperatures in this time frame right here. It's the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. So this was issued today, by the way, just a couple short hours ago. And this runs from August 1st through the 5th of the month. So below average temperatures on the way, more than likely, for the areas that live in the blue shaded region. So if you live in some of these darker shaded blue areas, this is where your chances are a little bit higher for below average temperatures. Now, I know from our friends tuning in Texas, areas of the deep south, and definitely Florida, you're thinking, man, what about us? We'll speak a little bit on that and you guys as we get deeper into the video. But this is just the 6 to 10 day temperature outlook. So it's good that, the experts from the Climate Prediction Center, the National Weather Service, is already seeing this too. And they've been showing this for the last several days. And it's not just some, guy on YouTube, trying to wish cast this in place, if you will. The Climate Prediction Center is seeing it too. So that's the temperature outlook. I do want to speak a little bit on precipitation, and that will be an added thing in this video, and there is a reason why it will be, and I'll speak on it as we go along here. This is the 6 to 10 day precipitation outlook, same time frame, the 1st of August through the 5th. If you live in these green areas, this is where the Climate Prediction Center is calling for the chance at above average precipitation. As you can tell, it's looking like we're going to be rainy. Of course, it's August. It's not snow. So we can say it's going to be rainy. It's going to be wet. More than likely, we're going to have a daily shower and storm activity across areas of the deep south in this time frame. Looks like the Northeast is going for, or at least leaning towards, below average precipitation chances. And I'll also explain why that is the case. So let's break down this. Now, there's a lot of things getting shared on social media, showing pretty blue maps, kind of like what I've already showed you and what I'm about to show you. And, they might not be really explaining it very deeply here. So let's talk about it here. So this is beginning the morning of July the 30th. So next Wednesday morning, as you can tell, still above average temperatures. And let's just make this really simple. If you see the cooler colors on your screen, this is below average temperatures being predicted by the Euro Ensemble. If you see the warmer colors like the orange and the reds, that's above average temperatures being predicted by the EPS here. So let's move this in time. And as we start to get into like midday Wednesday, look how all of a sudden you see like these greens. I mean, this is 10 to 15 degrees below your average temperature. So if your average temperature is, say, 80 degrees in Nebraska, not saying that's what it is, just providing an example, then maybe you only have highs in the 60s. Okay, now watch as all these pretty blues, and I'm going to call it pretty because I'm rooting for this cool down, begin to sink south ever so slowly day by day as we creep closer to August. We get into the last day of July, below average temperatures move a little bit further south, still hanging on to some areas of above average temperatures for Texas. You're starting to see a little bit show up for the deep south. This is probably generated off shower and storm activity. And then as we start to get into the first day of August, August 1st, all right, you're seeing more blue on your screen starting to take over, the eastern U.S., areas of the southeast still hanging on to some above average temperature chances here. But a good chunk of the upper southeast, the northeast, the mid-Atlantic, the Ohio Valley, down to the mid-south, even areas of the deep south, of course the Midwest and the plains, going with below average temperature anomalies. So let's keep it rolling here. And as we start to get into Saturday, it really becomes more entrenched in the look here. So at this point, good chunk of the central and eastern U.S. just about has below average temperatures. This is getting about a week from today. So around this time next week, next Saturday, it could be a totally different story across areas of the country. Now, as we start to get into next Sunday, you still see it. Below average temperatures dominating the southern tier of the country. You're warming up a little bit more in the higher latitudes up here in the upper Midwest, maybe the Northeast. You're starting to see more of the return of the oranges and stuff like that. But in general, it just looks like we knocked down that heat. And in fact, below average temperatures still hang around as we get between that day 7 to day 10 time frame for the Southeast, and this is 3 to 5 degrees below average. So if your average high is 92, 93 degrees, say here in my neck of the woods in Columbia, South Carolina, then maybe your highs will only be in the 80s. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And I'm going to explain why I keep reiterating that here in a second. But it looks like above average temperatures returning to the north of these below average temperatures. Why is that? We'll explain it here in a second. But we continue to get the day 10, and you can tell how the country does slowly begin to warm back up into a couple degrees above average. Now, the Southeast still hangs around near normal or below average temperature, slightly, not much, a degree or two. But anyways, we'll stop it around there. And let's continue to move forward here. Now, what does this mean in regards to actual high temperatures? And let's look at just the blend of all models. To start off for tomorrow, you notice it's going to be very hot across a good chunk of the middle of the country. But if you do look up here, already cooler temperatures trying to slip into North Dakota, northern Minnesota, Montana, but I mean 90s, low 100s across the middle of the country. And this is for tomorrow. Tuesday, you notice that ever so slightly, those lower temperatures begin to sink a little bit further south, and this is projected high temperatures off the blend of all models. Okay, we go into Wednesday, still very hot across the southern tier of the country. But look, these are high temperatures, potential high temperatures for this coming Wednesday across the northern plains, the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes region, only, into the 70s, low 80s, so a nice break from the heat. We go to the last day of July. That heat starts to get beat down even more, so starting to cool down in Missouri, Kansas, Colorado, but still very hot for Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, etc. And then we start to get into August 1st, and could begin to warm back up in the plains, but it looks like the cool down begins to slip into the eastern U.S. after that, and then we get to the 4th, then we get into the 5th, and it looks like the heat does return, but not as intense as it is right now, and getting into the next few days. Now, what about, say, low temperatures? What does it mean with this cool down, right? So we get into Tuesday morning, we're getting some 50s, slipping into into North Dakota, into Minnesota. Look at those 40s showing up in northern Minnesota. Still low temperatures in the 70s across a good chunk of the Central Plains, the Mississippi Valley. Nothing too crazy to write home about that. But then as we get, say, into August 1st, we start to get some low temperatures in the 50s all the way down to Nebraska, Colorado, northern areas of Kansas, Iowa, northern areas of Missouri. So some cooler air. Look how cool it is up here in the UP of Michigan, 40s. And then we start to get into August 2nd. Low temperatures could get down to the 60s, all the way down to Kansas, Missouri. Nothing too crazy. And then it starts to warm up after that. So it looks like, it isn't a substantial cool down temperature-wise, but it is some cooler air, right? Now, what about for my friends here in the eastern U.S.? Okay, starting off Monday, highs you can see are in the hundreds down the southeast. 80s and 90s up into the Ohio Valley, the northeast. Nothing too crazy up there. It's just going to be very hot and humid for the south. We get into Tuesday, upper 90s. Nothing too wild, but definitely above average hot, humid. We get into Wednesday, you get into Thursday. Now, look at that big difference here across the Midwest and the Ohio Valley. Highs in the 80s and 90s, July 30th, next Wednesday. Then look at the highs for July 31st, Thursday, next Thursday. Highs in the 70s in Chicago, Indianapolis, Cleveland. That's a pretty stout temperature gradient setting up right here. Mid-Atlantic, 80s and 90s, not too bad. But look at the Northeast cooling down to the 70s and 80s. And then we take it one more frame. This is August the 1st, next Friday. Still pretty warm across the Deep South. This is pretty normal summer temperatures. But look at this cooler air slipping into the northern areas of North Carolina, heck, even Tennessee. And look up into Virginia, West Virginia. Highs only in the upper 70s, low 80s. And then look as we get into next Saturday, a week from today. A break from the heat. Only highs in the 80s for the South. Still 90s for the Gulf coastline. And Florida is most likely going to be hard. It's going to be very difficult for this cool down to make it down to Florida. But it looks like we get a totally different weekend next weekend. And then it starts to warm back up gradually. But even as it warms up, it's still below average temperature wise for certain areas. And if not that, just average temperatures. But listen, the big thing that we really break down with this is a lot of people are going to see these blue maps and they're going to immediately think pumpkin spice latte. Here comes our fall front, a nice breeze. It's in the upper 50s. Now, for some areas, that could definitely be the case. And, one thing I didn't show you guys is low temperatures for the eastern U.S. And let's just do that real quick here. And these are low temperatures moving forward here. What you'll notice here is we're getting into the 31st is we got some 50s in the lower Michigan, but it's not very cool yet into the Midwest, the Ohio Valley. But then we start to get into the morning of the 1st of August. Look at these 50s sneaking into Ohio, the Northeast, even some 40s. It's cooler air. We get into next Saturday morning, some 60s dropping down, maybe as far south as northern Tennessee, northern North Carolina. And then maybe we get some of our first sub 70 degree readings for low temperatures for areas of the South that we've seen in weeks, maybe since June. And I'd like to see that 68, 69 degrees here in South Carolina. I would love a morning in the 60s. That's how desperate I am for a cool down. And, it doesn't look substantial, but I mean, look, this is next, not this coming Monday morning, but next Monday morning, trying to get lows in the 60s all the way down to Atlanta. So we'll see. Now let's go back to this. So this is dew points, right? This is the best measure of how humid it is in the atmosphere. So when you get obviously temperatures in the 50s and low 60s, you need your dew points to be lower than that for the temperatures to drop and to get to that wet bulb temperature and things like that. So, dew points in the 70s, tropical air. 60s, not as tropical, still a little humid. When you get into the 50s, that's when you have that drier air mass and there's basically no humidity. So we'll start this off for the morning of the 29th. And we start to move this in motion. Let's click on this and we're rolling now here. And we're getting into, say, Wednesday, and then we're getting into Thursday. You see up here how the dew points are dropping from the 60s and 70s to the 50s up here? That is our cold front dropping down, kind of our trough, a return flow around the backside of this trough. But it's still very humid in the southeast. Dew points in the 70s. As we start to get into Friday of next week, hey, look at this drier air. Dew points in the 50s and 60s all the way down to the Central Alps and to the Ohio Valley. We got some drier air moving in. These are not temperatures, these are dew points. But it's still very moist down here in the Deep South. 70s, deep tropical moisture. So are we going to get any of that dry air for the South? Well, on this specific one on the Euro, it never quite makes it to the South. So, yes, below average temperatures. Okay, but are we going to get a nice 88 degrees with your dew points in the upper 50s and low 60s where you walk outside and you're like, man, it's warm, but it's not very humid? Or is it going to be a nice 88 degrees, but not so nice, and your dew points in the 70s? And yes, it's still cooler, but it's still awfully humid. And that's what I think is really going to be our pattern across the South. Even though we'll get a cool down, it's not that first cold front of early September kind of cool down. I really don't think it is. Now, for some areas, you'll have some cooler mornings, but I don't think it's the cool down that a lot of people think it is. But, as we start to get into about day 10, you have a stronger cold front that begins to impact the Great Lakes region, but I just think that's just going to sweep across the Northeast. So to kind of break this down, summarize this again really quick, most of your tropical air maintains itself across the Deep South, and that really dry air does not make it down. Now, why do we have so much tropical air that remains in place even though we have lower air temperatures? Well, I just think a lot of energy is going to get trapped across the eastern U.S. and the southeast, and we're going to have a stalled boundary because our cold front is going to kind of stall out for a couple of days. So we start this out next Wednesday, July the 30th, and you're just going to see a lot of splotches of green, yellow, orange, and red. Just think of this as just shower and storm action, and you're going to see a lot of this over the mid-Atlantic, across the deep south, the mid-south, and it just continues. We get in August 1st, and you continue just to get a lot of shower and storm activity. August the 3rd, August the 4th, a lot of action. In fact, it pops off a low pressure off the mid-Atlantic, and it just looks like an unsettled pattern. And another great way to look at this, it represents it well, is if you look at the blend of all models between now and the next about 11 days or so, look how rainy it's going to get across the deep south and the southeast up into the mid-Atlantic. So to wrap this video up, guys, this cool down is really generated for the south basically off a lot of rain and cloud cover. So you're still going to have the moist air, but a lot of daily afternoon shower and storm action is probably going to keep our temperatures lower. Now, you are going to have some mornings where you have some dry air, some days where you have some dry air. You're going to probably get some mornings in the upper 60s, and that's going to be nice. But it's not that cold. That's not that cool down that we really want, but it's a cool down that we will absolutely take. Now, you get up here, not as much rain forecast, and I do think you'll get some of that dry air. So, we can look at it again because I just want you guys to kind of understand what I mean. This is the blend of all models. Shows it well here. We get into August 1st, and you see these dew points like in the 50s up here. Let's draw on this a little bit. See how the dew points are? Let's just draw a little line right through here. Up here, okay, you got dew points in the 50s and 60s. Nice air mass. Down here, dew points in the 70s and upper 60s. So the cool down comes in that time frame that the Climate Prediction Center highlights, but it's just not that crisp fall air mass that we want. Now, as we get into next weekend, we could have a little bit of dry air that sneaks into the upper south. You see these dew points into the 60s, into the Carolinas. Maybe a little bit of cold air damming helps with that. So I do think next weekend we could actually get some drier air that does get knocked down into the southeast. That will allow our temperatures to try to dip into the upper 60s, something like that. But, speaking for areas to the north, you absolutely will have an opportunity for temperatures in the 50s and 60s for low temperatures. And some highs, maybe only in the 70s and low 80s. For the south, air mass will be a little bit different, but you will still have some cooler temperatures. I hope that makes sense. Just wanted to explain that to you guys, but that's all I got. I appreciate y'all tuning in. God bless all y'all, and y'all have a wonderful evening. We'll talk again tomorrow morning. God bless.